when God brought them into the desert. And so they complained and they argued and they wanted to go back into captivity because they didn't believe in who God was and what he did. They didn't believe that he was faithful, that he was a provider, that he was powerful, that he was full of grace and truth, and he would give them everything they needed. They didn't believe who he was. They didn't believe that he would continue to be who he was, right? And we do this, right? I hope that you guys are thinking in your heart, oh yes, I can see myself doing this, right? So in order for us to be full of faith and not fear, we need to have faith in who God is and what he's done, right? Now there are some valid fears. For example, yesterday I was talking to the boys about why I do not let them ride bikes in the middle of the street, right? There are fears that we have in our hearts and in our minds that are valid, right? And that keep ourselves from being destroyed, right? I would not allow my 3-year-old to ride his bike in the middle of the street. However, there are some fears that we have that war against our faith. For example, Jesus commands us to love our enemies. That's kind of a fearful command if we're not full of faith, because the word enemies that Jesus is using are those who would take our lives, those who are against us. And if he's calling us to love our enemies, that can be a fearful thing if we're not full of faith in who God is and that he himself, Jesus, loved those who were his enemies, us, who would take his life, us, right? We are to imitate him in that, and also that he has saved our souls, he's redeemed us, right? So we have no more fear because he's redeemed us, and our eternity is set in heaven with him. So we no longer need to fear, like Jesus says, those who would kill the body, but only fear the Lord, the one who would send our souls to heaven or hell, right? So now that's an extreme example. But this morning we're going to talk about 2 fears that are very common to motherhood, and that's the fear of unknowns and fear of failure. I don't know if when you guys read the email, if you're like, oh yes, I definitely am fearful about things that are unknown. And I feel like these fears surface more often for us in the city because there are so many variables, right? It's ever-changing. You really have no control ability in the city. And also, if you fail in the city, it feels like you fall harder because the bar of success is so high because failure looks so low, right? And so we have this bar, and we're thinking, we have to meet this bar, we have to meet this bar. And then if we continue to fail, it can be very fearful, right? So, but these fears don't show us that the city is at war with us, right? But instead they show us that there's a war in our hearts, where we trust more in our circumstances and in our own abilities than in God who knows all things and accomplishes all things perfectly. Our fears are warring against our faith. So as our call as mothers, these 2 fears also present themselves regularly or hourly, even in our homes. And we should never assume that we should change our circumstances as being mothers, right? If we're fearing the unknown, if we're fearing failure, we should never say, I shouldn't be a mom, right? That would make no sense. God has obviously called us to be mothers so that we have children. Instead, we must realize where our fears are at war with our faith and to trust God instead. This is kind of close to my heart because when I had Eli, I was 24, and I'd hardly ever thought about mothering before, and so I was constantly afraid of things I didn't know, like, what do his belly button just fell off? What do I do? It looks like boogers. And then also fearing of failure. What if he never learned to take consistent naps? What if he never learned to eat broccoli? Or what if I made so many mistakes in teaching him the word or in disciplining him that I scarred him for life? Just feeling afraid of failure, feeling afraid of the unknown. And so my best friend would always encourage me to a greater faith in God's sovereign goodness. She would tell me that God had made and designed me to be the perfect mom. It's embarrassing, but I'm correct. For this perfect child that he created in my womb. And those mistakes and failures that I would inevitably make were part of this perfect plan for not only my redemption, but also for his. So for us to be full of faith in who God is what I want for us. And with that, I would love to introduce you our wonderful panel, which I'm so excited that they're here today. This is Whitney Sterling and Susie Fields. And they're here to talk about their own experiences in mothering and how we can be full of faith and not fear. With that, I'll let you guys introduce yourself.